So Sam and I will be your hosts today. Katie won't be joining us, but I'm Julian from the design team, and
I'm Sam, also from the design team.
okay, great. So we're really excited to talk to you about work-based learning and show off everything that we've been working on. So we'll go over just briefly what we're going to be covering in today's session. So first of all, we're going to talk a bit about why we made this feature to begin with and what the need for it is, as well as who is it for, what are some of the use cases that it really works best for. Then we'll go over an overview of the system, how it all works together, and what each aspect of the feature really kind of does. Then we'll go over a brief system demonstration, so go through some live data within the system, as well as show off the learner app working as well. And then we'll kind of talk about what our planned improvements are for the feature. As we've said before, it's still in a beta, and that's just so that we can continue to improve it. So not just leave it as it is. What we have planned to continue to develop and improve, based on feedback. Then we'll kind of talk about some of the avenues for providing feedback to us so that we can continue to make it the best it can be. And we'll talk a little bit about the pricing of the feature, and then move on to some Q&A as well. So first of all, why did we make this feature? So really, we understand that work-based learning is a really common part of modern training. There's a lot of different courses out there that really require on-the-job learning and work experience to be part of that learning journey for students. And we know that it's not something that really has a lot of great solutions out there, and specifically not within the aXcelerate ecosystem. We've also, from our research and speaking to our clients, know that a lot of the time it is a kind of manual, paper-based process that a lot of people are still doing at the moment, which first of all ends up being quite manual and arduous to do, as well as it's not a great experience for learners. So for us to really have a more modern solution that we can provide to our clients to provide to their students, that's really the goal. And really what we want to get out of this is just to have an end-to-end digital solution for managing work-based learning entirely within the aXcelerate ecosystem. So I'm going to talk a bit about some of the roles that are involved in using the feature. So to begin with, there's obviously the admins, and they do really the bulk of the work in terms of setting up and managing the enrollments, as well as kind of overseeing the process, doing reporting and analytics and all those types of things. There's obviously the learners, who are going to be the ones visiting employers and recording evidence within their digital logbook, providing entries, and recording media evidence and all that kind of stuff that we'll talk about more a bit later. There's also then the supervisors, and they're the people from the host employers that are going to be looking after the students while they're visiting their organization and working with them. And then there's the trainers and assessors, who then are also part of managing the enrollment process as well, and stopping in to conduct workplace assessments and things like that as part of the process. So really the best use cases for it is for supporting learners where they're doing a course where they need to work with an employer and get some evidence working within the industry and recording that evidence somewhere in some type of logbook. So really it's aimed at providing a solution for work placements, apprenticeships, traineeships, just anywhere where you're getting some type of work experience. So there's some use cases are supported a bit better than others at the moment. But what we're really aiming to do is to try and gather feedback and continue to improve the system so that we can kind of bridge the gaps where we find them and use that user feedback to support more scenarios and really make it support kind of any type of course where work-based learning is involved. So now we're going to go over kind of an overview of the feature and the system in general. to just kind of give a bit of a summary of what's involved and how everything interconnects.
Yeah, so what we're looking at here is a little illustration just to give you a high-level idea of how the system sort of looks in terms of the major objects that are involved. So obviously in the middle we have the actual work placement, which we've also called the apprenticeship or the traineeship, whatever the use case is for your organization. So that's at the core of it. Obviously the host employer or host employers, they're a core part of sort of setting up that actual placement. And how it sort of plays nicely back into aXcelerate is the link between activities and the units of competency from the qualification that that learner is actually undertaking. So in terms of the logbook cycle, which is, I guess, the core element of the actual work-based learning recording process. So this has a few main participants, mainly the learner, so them on the job recording what they've done, recording evidence, adding a reflection, and then submitting that through to either the host employer supervisor or the trainer or assessor with the training organization. And from there, those sort of, I guess, review participants can look at adding additional feedback to tell the learner, what else is necessary as part of that entry to make it a little bit more refined, or give them positive feedback and say, everything's there that needs to be. So from that point, they can review the entry or actually add a bit of feedback and put it as what we call needs review. So that will go back to the learner with the feedback for them to refine that entry a little bit further. So that's an overview of how that cycle generally works, which will be the main process for the learner throughout the work-based learning experience. So the learner app, so the intention with the learner app is to actually have a complementary mobile app for learners to use as they're studying, with your organizations powered by aXcelerate. So the main thing that the app does, or its main purpose at the moment, is for facilitating that work-based learning process. But the intention is that we will sort of build out quite a few of the learner portal features that we have at the moment. And we will slowly bring those across to the app so that learners have, I guess, another platform where they can, access their training materials, see announcements, see their schedule, look at their course progress, that sort of thing. So we've managed to build quite a lot of that functionality. There's still some key things like assessments in the e-learning, which will still get the learner to go back to the mobile responsive version of the learner portal to complete. But yeah, as I said, we're slowly working on porting across most of the feature set we have in our learner portal to be in the app as well. So the app really is meant to be a lot more than just work-based learning, but that is its main use case at the moment. So the work-based learning component of the app is, I guess, the main reason why you would use it with your learners at the moment. So it allows them to create logbook entries, which this is what we're seeing in the mocks to the right. So those logbook entries are made up of the activities that they worked on, the evidence related to those activities, the start time, the finish time, and then a couple of reflection elements as well. And all that information forms to be the logbook entry, which will then, either go back to the trainer, or actually both go back to both the trainer / assessor or the host employer supervisor. So one of the main, I guess, reportable elements of this will be the time recorded. So when the learner says that they've started and finished, as well as they can turn that into the actual hours they've done as well. So that will be one of the main use cases, is keeping track of those hours that they've done with that host employer. And there's also an option to change that to be days that they need to achieve as well. So yeah, through all those mechanisms, it gives quite a good sense of progression to both the learner and the actual host employer and the training organization as to how far they are through their placement, as well as what activities they've sort of accomplished so far. So obviously all of this needs to be powered by, a section within aXcelerate where you can actually set up all of these placements and host employers and activities and that sort of thing. So we call this the work-based learning admin area, which is what we've got up on the screen at the moment. So that's where you'll set up all of your host employers and their supervisor users, where you can view the details and progress of each enrollment, and where people from inside your training organization can review those logbook entries. If it's relevant as well, there's also a scheduling component that is done through the admin area, which can be used to sort of create events really easily for learners to understand when and where they're supposed to go in terms of their placement or their traineeship. It's also where you create the actual work-based learning activities and map them back to units of competency. So depending on what qualification that learner is studying, that's how the system will decide what work-based learning activities to show them through those mapping links that you'll create. So the final component is the supervisor app. So the intention for this app is to be used by the host employer supervisors that you work with. And there's two main use cases for using the app. The first one being reviewing those logbook entries that the learner has submitted, with the ability for the supervisor to sign off and say, yes, what the learner has included in this logbook entry is actually what they did, and sort of adding a verification step to that, which can form, evidence towards a third-party report or similar. There's also the ability to mark attendance, which ties into the scheduling feature, which we talked about previously. Not all training organizations are going to be sort of worried about attendance in terms of their learners' placement or traineeship. But if it is something that needs to be sort of accounted for, supervisors can say whether that learner actually showed up to their particular placement, visit, or session. So now we're just going to go through a brief system demonstration. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second so that I can bring up what we are going to be sharing. All right.
Okay, thanks for bearing with us.
Thanks for waiting, everyone. We were just getting up our window to share. Cool. So this is the work-based learning admin area that we showed briefly before. So there's sort of 5 main components to this. Host employers, which are pretty self-explanatory, but we might jump in and have a look at that. So in this example, we've got one called Ramen House. So we've got all the details for that host employer, which is important for passing along to the learner, but also being used in things like generating agreements between host employer and the learner in order to easily pull all their information in. You can create additional information about that host employer, which can be pulled to templates as well. So anything that's quite obscure or people need to know about this host employer, as in your admin staff, as well as adding notes about this host employer, which again is for internal admin use. So up here as well, we've got average learner sentiment. So when the learner submits their logbook entry, they're actually able to give a rating of sort of how that day went for them. And these are all aggregated together in order to sort of give a little bit of a metric of, generally how good of a time do learners have with specific host employers. And obviously lower numbers here might be cause for concern with, I guess, the general way learners are being treated with that host employer or just their experience in general. And over this last box we have here is the actual supervisors. So this is where you would set up supervisor users who can't actually log into your aXcelerate system. They'll only be able to log into the supervisor app. So these can be people outside of your training organization, that work with the host employers. So back to our placement tab. And there is the opportunity to customize the terminology we have here. We're likely going to be saying placement a lot during this webinar, but the system allows you to customize this to be placement, traineeship, apprenticeship, and internship, I believe, are the four we have at the moment. So think of those as sort of interchangeable terms for the purpose of this demo. So we're going to go into George Smith. So placements at the moment are based on an enrollment and aXcelerate, so a class enrollment. So we can see at the moment that George is undertaking a qualification, a certificate 3 in commercial cookery, and this is the class that this placement is actually based on. And we've got a few other details here, such as the required hours and the start date and the end date of the actual placement. So required hours can also be changed to required days, but essentially that's our main metric for progress and seeing how far the learner is through their placement. And so looking at this progress box on the right, we can get some more detailed information about how close the learner actually is to hitting that 60 hours that they need. So this is going to be a combination of hours that have been approved through logbook entries, as well as any that have been manually added, just in case the logbook entries don't reconcile. And this yellow portion of the bar that we can see here is pending hours. So this is logbook entries that the learner has submitted that no one has actually approved yet. So we have, in this case, a couple of different host employers for this particular placement. So George is actually going to be going to Ramen House first, and then later on to Jacques French Cuisine. So this may or may not be relevant to your particular placement setup, but if the learner does need to switch host employers halfway through, or if that was the plan from the start, that is something that will be possible. And we can see as well on the right here that at Ramen House, I'm actually George's supervisor. So we have some other basic details as well. You can edit the contact details from here and the emergency contact details. You don't need to go back to that learner's profile and aXcelerate, which is nice, as well as notes about this specific placement. So these are, again, I've put one, which is a bit funny because I'm the supervisor, but these placement notes are, again, for internal administration staff at the organization to sort of make any relevant notes about how this placement is going, what concerns there might be, and anything that, other staff need to be aware of. So if we go into now the logbook, we can see that George has submitted 2 entries, one of which I've already approved. So we'll jump into the approved one, and we'll sort of break down what exactly has been included as part of this. And later on, we'll actually look at how this would have looked for George to submit this entry via the learner app. So this one I've already approved. We can see the time that was logged. We can see the sentiment, which was what I was talking about before in terms of that little face rating that sort of describes how they were feeling, as well as a reflection, which is sort of just free text for the learner to talk about or add any extra detail to that logbook entry that they need to. So we can see that 5 activities have been recorded, as well as there's 3 pieces of evidence that's been included. So if we can actually, I won't play these, but we can actually go through the evidence that the learner has recorded or submitted and sort of factor that into our review to see, does it relate to the activities that have been submitted, and is it sufficient in terms of how it was recorded and what was included and that sort of thing. So if that was sufficient, then we could say, add a bit of feedback here, and this will actually come back into the logbook entry in the learner app. So in this case, we've approved it and we've added a bit of feedback for George, and he's going to be able to see that. But if we were to mark it as needs review, he would see that feedback as well, but he'd have the chance to resubmit this logbook entry and make any changes that he needed to based on the feedback he received. And this is just an example of one that he submitted, but we haven't actually approved or added any feedback for him to work on. So what's probably the best thing to show at this stage?
Well, I think it's also worth mentioning. Yeah, so the idea is that when the learners are recording all this evidence, it's going against their logbook and kind of working to build a digital portfolio of all of the evidence that they've kind of recorded as part of that. So we'll kind of continue to add, more reporting and analytics to be able to view some of those things. But the very first thing that we have is an export view. So the capacity to be able to, export the logbook to do with, as you wish, as well as some alternate views, say to view by activity, so that you can have a look at everything that George has recorded about preparing sushi. So you can see that this is the amount of time he's recorded, and this is the evidence of him actually doing these particular activities, which then again map it back to units of competency. So I think probably worth going through the activities at this point and talking about that unit relationship.
Sure. Okay. Just before we leave the placement view, I will also go to George's schedule, which again won't be relevant for every use case. But if we did want to create a schedule, it's as simple as turning on the days of the week that George is going to be going to this particular host employer, and the system will automatically create events based on the pattern that you set up here. So in this case, if we were to update the schedule with our new start date, we'll remove the events that no longer fit the pattern, and we'll create new ones in order to fit that pattern properly. So scheduling placements is a very, very simple process, and these visits are what supervisors will be able to mark attendance on. So if attendance marking is relevant for your particular type of placement or traineeship, scheduling is going to be a terrific feature.
I think also just to mention that you can manage the schedules for each host employer assigned to a placement. So that if we say and change it to Jacques French cuisine, then we can have a look at that pattern as well, and then that will show up according to the schedule start and end that's been set up there as well. And then if we just hit cancel, we can have a look at the calendar view, which is week by default, but then we can see, if we have a look at the month, we can see each of those kind of planned out as well. And then you can, of course, not need to abide by the pattern and just create individual scheduled visits as well. Delete them, edit them. And then you can also manually mark the attendance from here as well, if that's not something that the supervisors are required to do. The admins or trainers could do that instead.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on, we might jump now to the activities area. So we can see here some of what we're looking at here are activity types. So these are our sort of categories in which our activities fall. So these will be same ones that we saw before in those logbook entries. So essentially within each activity, we can add mapping back to units of competency. So in this case, we can see that prepare katsu curry is linked to this particular unit of competency here. So this is something we've already set up, and we have the opportunity to unmap it or actually go and view that unit. And so in this case, we're viewing it in the context of a activity, but we could actually view it in the context of this unit of competency and this qualification through the qualifications tab. So there's a bit of flexibility there, how you want to do that mapping, and do you want to build an activity that's going to be used by many units of competency, or do you want to actually start with a single qual and sort of build out the activities there, which then can be reused for future or additional qualifications down the line. So if we add some mapping to this, and I'll do cookery again, we'll also map it to something a bit random. So that's just an example of how you would set up that mapping there. And if we wanted to, we could, or I guess now that we've done that, another good thing to show would be the fact that we can create a new activity. I won't have any, go
work with a deep fryer.
Yeah, work with deep fryer. I'll just say that's part of Japanese dishes for now. And so we won't set an image for that, but all these images that are set against the activity will show up in the learner app for the learner to pick from. So probably quite a good idea to do that. So if we go back over now into George's placement, have a look at what activities he has access to, we can see that, well, actually we might need to refresh for that to show up. No, not map that. Potentially I did not map it correctly.
But so the idea is against a placement, you can choose which activities are enabled and disabled. So if there's potentially particular activities that have been mapped, then you'll be able to, have a bunch set against a particular qualification. But if, say, there's a particular student at visiting a host employer that doesn't do particular activities, you can cut down that list so that it's really the most relevant things for that student to select from. So yeah, hopefully now that we've actually set up and mapped it, then the idea is that this activity will then become available to enable for students that have that have a placement for that qualification, and for any new placements that are created for that qualification, then they will have that activity available by default as well.
Cool. So the last thing that we might look at is, because I think we're running a bit over, is just creating a new placement, and we'll talk briefly about presets as well. So this is the screen you see when you're actually creating a placement. And what you're able to do here is customize, well, first of all, you search for a particular learner. So do we have one that we were?
Alexander Roberts.
Okay. Well, okay. So essentially what presets are is the ability to fill out the information we have here in a lot more of a consistent way. So they essentially are templates of information. So if you have several placements that have the exact same required duration or start and end at the exact same time, like blocks, you can use presets to fill out some of this information automatically when you actually create new placements. So the process of setting up placements in the system should be very easy, especially where you're reusing a lot of the same values for each placement you're creating, especially where it's a school cohort or it's individual trainees who are doing the same qualification with the same requirements. So you can use a preset to pre-fill some or none of these details in order to make the process of getting all these placements into the system a little bit more straightforward.
Yeah, and so the idea with presets again is for them to be quite flexible. So the ones that we have set up in the account is one that's as specific as it can be. So as we saw for this commercial cookery preset, we had the host employers, the dates, the required hours, everything pre-filled aside from the student and their enrollment. But the other one that we have, and it also has the schedule set up as well. But the other one that we have available is just a full-time schedule. And so that has no qualification, no host employer, anything like that set up. But just what it means is then when you go to create that placement, it already has a full-time schedule set up. So, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, or whatever you would consider full-time. So it just goes to show that, how kind of flexible the presets can be used, just to make the population of data, as easy as it can be.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so we might now jump over quickly into the Learner app to have a look at a little bit of George Smith's perspective in terms of the Learner app and the work-based learning component of that. So I'll do a new share to my so we are using what's called an emulator here. So I'm not actually doing this off my phone, but an app on my PC. So we will have some funny controls over to the side here, but that's all good. So what we're looking at here is the actual main Learner app home screen. So you'll note this isn't sort of particularly about work-based learning, which is our intention with the Learner app, it to be a complementary to the learner's studies at your organization, not just for the work-based learning component, but actually for their entire qualification. So we're looking at George, and even though we've only seen George in the context of his work-based learning, he's actually undertaking a Certificate 3 in commercial cookery, which he has some units already competent within. So if we drill into his qualification details, we can see a little bit of information about his progress and his course dates. We can have a look at each of the units and each of the resources and materials underneath them. Any announcements that come up. So we've got one from Katie welcoming us to our cookery course. So yeah, those are essentially the same things that you would see within our learner portal on the web. So the intention here is there's going to be, I guess, another method through the app to access these particular things. With things like assessments, we do, our intention for the time being is that learners will still do them through the learner portal in the mobile responsive window. And that is because the learner app is actually or supports offline capability, whereas our online assessments do not support offline capability at this stage. So they will still need a connection and I guess the internet browser to go and do things like online assessments, and of course things like SCORM packages as well. So they're still done through the mobile browser. Okay, so we might now, or I'll just talk a little bit more about what we're seeing here. So the dashboard for learners is made up of events that they have this week and events that they have, I think the following week is what upcoming sort of pertains to. So we can see here we've got several workplace visits to our host employer ramen house. Wouldn't be as relevant if your learner was on a full-time schedule, so they're always with that host employer. You probably wouldn't use the scheduling feature in that case, but there's also some workshops that we have here which are part of our qualification rather than the work-based learning component of our qualification. So speaking of work-based learning, we'll now jump into the placement tab. So again, this will be customizable in terms of how it appears to the learner. And we can see those logbook entries that we saw on the admin side, we now see them on the learner side. So we can have a look at the one that was already approved. So we've got our feedback from Katie. We've got the activity selected, the evidence we submitted. So that's a approved one. And if we go into a draft one, we can see we are able to set the start time, the finish time, and then the actual total of the hours. So adjusting for things like lunch breaks if necessary. We can choose which host employer that was at. We can add some evidence. I won't do that at the moment because we are running on a computer, not a real phone. And we can adjust our sentiment as well. So this is the activity selection screen. So this is where the learner will select what activities were relevant for that particular logbook entry. So at the moment, it's grouped by activity types, which the learner can jump through. We don't have that many, so we don't have to do a lot of scrolling in this case, but I can select as many as I want, and they'll automatically save. And I can also see ones that I've selected recently, as well as my most frequently selected activities. So at the moment, you simply select activities and you can add, I guess, general evidence that associates with those activities. But what we're working on at the moment is something we're calling activity evidence, which will be the process of taking an activity such as prepare sushi and actually adding evidence that's specific to that particular activity. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later and show you a bit of a teaser, but that's going to be our intention for, I guess, providers who want to sort of take it to the next level in terms of detail and really let learners capture specific evidence about a particular activity, which of course ties back to the unit of competency that they're studying as part of the qualification. So the goal with that would be allowing the learner to develop a pretty nice portfolio of evidence in terms of things that they've done with their host employer on the job to form the basis of, a third-party report or an observation or anything else like that.
I think one more thing that I guess we should probably explain a bit about activities in general is the whole point around them is that so that we can give learners the best experience that we can. So rather than showing them the individual units necessarily that they'll be working on, that can be a bit abstract for them to think about. Whereas the concept of activities really gives them a much nicer and more natural view of the actual activities that they're kind of undertaking, and kind of group potentially several units together in terms of that kind of linkage, and group them nicely with the types. So that's where that kind of all comes in with in terms of the admin setup, flowing through to the learner experience.
Yeah, so each of these activities could or would represent one or more units of competency, but it gives you the opportunity to write them in a more user-friendly way, and tie them back to what are the actual real tasks or jobs that learners will complete on the job, and sort of do, rather than having them perform that mapping and trying to tie, real world activities back to units of competency, you've already done that for them in the setup. So all they have to worry about is saying, well, these are the actual things I did, in this case, when I was working in this restaurant, rather than worrying about particular units of competency. But we will be tying units of competency into the activities a little bit further, and that will form part of activity evidence, which will show you a little bit of a preview shortly.
Yeah. And you can also set activities as general as well. So you don't necessarily have to map them to units if there are some that are just more general tasks. So it isn't a requirement to do so, but it just helps with the analytics that you can get out of the system in terms of mapping them to the units.
Yeah, and if your long-term goal is to help learners generate a portfolio of evidence which is based on underlying units of competency, then you'd want that link to exist in order to sort of let the system know, well, what does this evidence relate to in terms of units of competency. So
maybe I look at profile.
Maybe just schedule. So the schedule, in this case, we've got our 2 workshops. This is really just an extended view of what we saw on the actual dashboard, but this will show all of the workshops, student activities, that sort of thing, as it would in the Learner Portal calendar. So this is just another view where they can actually see the particular events which they'll be going to, and get the information about where it is, what time it is. So this is a good way, I guess, to understand what they have on this week. So I'd say outside of the work-based learning component, one of the main reasons why you could use the app at the moment with your learners is to sort of give them easier access to that schedule and say, you've got these workshops this week, and that sort of thing. So do you think there's anything else within the app that's worth going over?
I mean, you could briefly mention, just can you open the side panel?
Yeah.
So this is just where, another menu is for the learner to kind of, manage some things in the app. So this is if a learner has multiple enrollments, they can select which enrollment that they're looking at, as well as manage some of their profile settings, which will respect any Learner Portal settings that are configured within your system settings. Say if you don't want them to be able to update their personal information, as well as you can customize your theme and enable dark mode and things like that, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, very cool. So yeah, we might leave the learner app here, but again, this is something at the moment that is available on the App Store. So if you do want to create yourself as a learner within aXcelerate and download the app and log in, you can have a look for yourself and see what's there. But we recommend setting up a placement prior to that, so that you have a bit more to look at and get a bit more of a better understanding what exactly the learner will see.
Yeah, and if you do want to test out the app, say in staging, that's something that you can do from the login screen. You'll be able to click the little cog in the bottom right-hand corner and log into the staging environment. So that's just if you want to set up a placement in your staging account, so it doesn't really, sit there and persist, then you can do that and play around with the data and do whatever you'd like to without really, harming any of your live account data.
Cool. So we'll go back to the presentation now.
Yeah, sure. Okay, great. Alrighty, so that's most of what we've got to show for the time being. We don't really have enough time to go through the supervisor app as well, but yeah, I guess that is tied in with the logbook process in terms of them being the ones to review and approve the logbook entries, as well as being able to mark attendance and provide digital signatures for the review process as well. And so that's something that you can go and download yourself and try out. You'll just need to be assigned as a supervisor to a placement to be able to have a play around with it. But yeah, we do encourage you to go do so. But yeah, now we'll talk a bit about what's kind of upcoming, what we're working on, and yeah, what we have in store for you soon. So the main things that we're working on, right at the moment, first of all is trainer portal support. So that's for the admin area to be accessible to trainer users and yeah, have them be able to access the information that they need to. The biggest kind of feature that we're working on at the moment is one that Sam touched on earlier, being activity evidence. So as we mentioned before, the evidence and time is really just at the logbook level, which can have multiple activities recorded against each entry. And so this will just, as the screens are showing on the right there, when you select a particular activity, you can attach evidence and record time that is really specific to that activity. And so it is just something that gives much more in-depth information and data about what the student's doing. So it's kind of up to you how you use the system. There's just a lot of tools at your disposal, but this will just be another one that really gives a lot more customizability and kind of deep data about what the student's doing, as well as we're adding in a few additional fields as well. So in the admin area against the activity area, you'll be able to set conditions, descriptions of the activity, and repetitions. So just a few more fields that you can enable or disable and customize to your liking to give a bit more information and a more tailored learner experience.
Yeah, and I suppose the main end goal with that is allowing learners to build a really nice portfolio of evidence for each unit of competency in terms of the on-the-job activities that they've completed. And obviously the ability to export that to say, I want to see all of the evidence for a particular unit and allow me to export that and form the basis of a third-party report or observation, or simply to, give to the learner so that they can see, what sort of work they've done and possibly use it for their career or otherwise as sort of a longer term goal for the system.
Yep. So some other improvements that we have coming to the learner app, just in general, not necessarily related to work-based learning. So the first is our learning plans feature, which we released late last year, is to support that within the app. So that's one that's will be coming fairly soon. And another one being able to mark attendance with learner signatures. So that's being able to look at your workshop within the app and sign off that you were there, which is another neat feature coming. And then another more long-term goal that we're looking at, that we currently have in the works, is a learner messaging feature as well, which obviously tie into the learner portal as well as the admin area as well. But it's something that will eventually also be accessible through the learner app for them to be able to message key contacts, say like their trainer, about things that are going on with their enrollment.
Yeah.
So some other planned improvements that we have generally to the work-based learning system is, so first of all, something that kind of ties in the workplace assessment process, kind of more tightly coupled with our online assessments system as well. So obviously the two will kind of work complementary to each other to be able to manage the work-based learning component of things, as well as assessing the students' competence in particular units and activities. But we'd like to have once we have some more of that information, say about the activity evidence, so for instance, being able to tie them in to use that evidence more directly as to support the students' competence and kind of form observation assessments and things like that as well. So that's something that we kind of have planned for the future as well. Similarly to better support third-party reporting, so to enhance some of the tools available to be able to better manage that process. Some just general enhancements to reporting and analytics. There are already dedicated reports for placements as well as host employers, but we'd like to have some more dedicated reports and things from within the work-based learning area itself. So yeah, we'll just kind of continue to build on that. We'd like to have some more bulk actions to be able to create and update placements, just to make them that process, the admin process, a bit easier. And this is somewhat of a concept that we have on the right to be able to manage the placements from within a class and say, for instance, change the data about several placements at once, and update those enrollments. We obviously have a continued endeavor to improve usability throughout the system. So that's just something that comes back from the user feedback that we get, just to make everything as easy to use as it is. The work-based learning system is obviously tied to everything else within the system. So when you create a supervisor, that's a contact. When you create a host employer, that's an organization. But you'll already see that there's options to be able to just directly create the contact and the organization straight from within the work-based learning area. So it's similar things like that that we'll kind of continue to add wherever we've kind of find any inefficiencies that any of our users raise with us. And then really just various improvements based off of the kind of feedback that we hear. So that's really why it's important that we get as many people using it, particularly within this beta period, because this is when we will really be dedicating the most time to making these improvements. So we really want to hear from you and get everybody up and running with it, so that we can bridge the gaps where we need and support as many of our clients and their work-based learning processes as we can.
Yeah, so don't be too disheartened when you try it out and something seems like it's not going to fit your process terribly well, because as part of this open beta, our main goal is to sort of look at, what sort of settings and adjustments and tweaks we can do to the system in order to make it work for as many of our clients as possible. So, but for that, we are relying on that feedback to come back to us so that we can look at what are the things being most asked for.
Yeah. So as we mentioned, we're eager for everyone to get started with it as soon as they can. So it's currently free for all Turbo accounts. You'll see it under the courses menu. And we're very eager for everyone to go and give it a go and see how it can work for your business. So there's some pretty extensive help resources that should help you to get started. So we've obviously got our help guides that you'll be able to see a getting started article, which will link off to all of the kind of subsections that we've talked about, say, within the admin area, as well as we've got our short hits of training as well. We've got a short series already available, which will show you kind of the start to end process of how to get up and running with everything. So if you watch it through kind of in sequence, it should help give you an understanding of how you go from first using the system to be up and running with it, and really just testing it out yourself, and eventually getting some learners involved.
Yeah, there's not too much pre-setup work you need to do in order to give the system a try. As we mentioned before, it's based on class enrollments. So if you did want to create a class for yourself and some of your staff, you can then look at creating placements and sort of giving it a go. But there's not too much work in other parts of the system that you need to do in order to be able to use the work-based learning area. So it is quite accessible at the moment to just jump in and give it a go. But yeah, we do recommend setting up a little test class first in order to have a bit of data to work with.
Yeah, or even again use it in staging. Yeah, if you're worried about anything like that, then yeah, please try it out in staging. Yeah, the app will be able to link up to that as well.
Yeah.
So in terms of gathering feedback, as we mentioned, that we're really striving to make as many improvements as we can during the beta period, which is set to go until the end of June. But we still want to make improvements even beyond that. But yeah, really, we just want to hear from you, the people using it, and yeah, get as much feedback as we can about how we can make the system the best it can be. So yeah, really, just if you want to tell us anything about improvements we can make, new features we can implement, or even yeah, what's really useful for us to know is gaps between what is your current process and how you see the system fitting into that. If there's anything in particular, that's the type of new features that we want to make to help you be able to adopt the system and begin to use it. And we have a link to our feedback form that we'll link out as after this webinar, but it's also available in a few places in the help guides as well, that you'll just be able to submit feedback directly to the product design team so that we can have a look at what's the most commonly requested things and what are things that we can implement to improve it.
Yeah, certainly.
So we will also just touch on pricing as well. So as we had mentioned, it's free for all Turbo accounts to use until the end of June. We still don't have a final pricing set at the moment, but we will be announcing it by the end of this quarter. So by March 31st, we'll put out some information about exactly what that will be. Just for a bit more information about that, the plan at the moment is for it to be on a per enrollment basis. So to also clarify some questions that may come out of that is that if there is a learner visiting multiple host employers for a single course, we would only count them once. So as we saw when we were going through the placement details page, we can have multiple host employers for a single placement, so that if they are visiting multiple host employers or changing between them, it's not going to rack up that the billing amount significantly. It's just going to be for that one student, for that one enrollment. That's at least the plan at the moment. But we will, again, put out more information about that. In terms of the apps, the Learner app is free to use without work-based learning. So we had mentioned that there are all of those, that information available for students to be able to log into the app and see. Obviously, they won't be able to see the placement tab and the logbook unless you have work-based learning set up within your system and a placement created for that student. But it is something that is free to download and use. The Supervisor app, on the other hand, is while it is free to download, it really only works for work-based learning at this stage, and that's the dedicated purpose for it. We do have some longer-term plans to eventually turn that into basically the admin app, so to support a much wider use case of actions that will work for trainers and admins and the like, and eventually also kind of include all of the trainer app functionality within the Supervisor app as well. But that's a much longer term goal. So for the time being, the Supervisor app again is specifically used for work-based learning. So hopefully that clarifies a few questions about this at the moment. But again, we will be sure to include everybody in this webinar as well as many people outside of it as well about any further information we have about pricing in the future. So now we're just going to go on with a bit of Q&A. Just see how much time we've kind of got left.
5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. So we had a few questions kind of submitted to us through the application. So we'll go through a couple of those as well, and then some of the ones that might have been posted in chat. And if we don't get to your question, then we'll try and answer them as best we can outside of this webinar as well. So we did have a question about whether we can pick and choose what parts of work-based learning we use. Say, for instance, you only want to use the the logbook and not other parts of the system? Does it require to use all the elements? So the answer with that is no, not all parts of the system are necessary to use. Obviously, there's some mandatory aspects, say creating a host employer and setting up a placement. Their requirements to be able to have the student see that logbook and submit it. But there's definitely also certainly parts of the system that are not mandatory to use. So for instance, the schedule, marking attendance, even setting up activities and presets, they really aren't technically mandatory to set up. So if you do want to do kind of a bare bones use of the system, then you really can do that. And yeah, I would just encourage anybody who's thinking about that to just set up and go and play with the system, and just see what parts that you want to add, and slowly begin to use more that's available within the system. So there was a question about whether the students and supervisors can sign the logbook electronically. That is for the supervisors to do at the moment. So they can provide a digital signature when they approve or set a logbook entry as needing review. That's something that we may add for learners in the future, but is just really a supervisor feature at the moment.
Just on the point of supervisors and I guess not having to use the whole system, one that will probably come up a little bit is whether the supervisor from the host employer actually needs to be involved, like they need to have the app. So what we're going to be working towards is a setting or a mode for the process where you don't actually need the supervisor from the host employer to sort of have the app on their phone. Will allow them to sign via the learner's app in order to get that signature, but not involve the host employer supervisor so much. So at the moment, you don't 100% need to involve the host employer supervisor, but if you do want to get their signature, they will need the app on their phone. But we do understand that different host employers will want different levels of engagement with that process. So we will be adding additional features to, I guess, let them do the bare minimum, which a lot of them will probably prefer.
Yeah, sure. So we'll try and touch on a few more. For anybody that needs to go to anything else, then thank you all for joining. But we'll try and answer a couple more here. So there was one about is it possible to create work-based learning programs that aren't based on units of competency? So as we've mentioned before, a placement does need to be linked to a class enrollment, but you can set up, say, qualifications with custom units and things like that. And when we mentioned the whole activity mapping framework, that is, again, one of those non-mandatory components of the setup. So it does mean that if you want to just set up all the activities and link them as general and not have a unit relationship, you can absolutely do so. Look like there's one about if there's traineeship without hours and only a 12-month date range, how does the progress matrix work? So I feel like that's one that, if you're not requiring a number of hours, I guess you might still be requiring a number of days for them to attend.
Or logbook entries.
Yeah, or logbook entries, that's right. So when you go to create a placement, there is the option to either set it as a required number of hours or days. And so in the case of days, then it is expected for a learner to have a logbook entry for each day. But it is, a logbook entry counts as each day being reported.
As one day, yeah.
Yep. But yeah, it's really just up to you as to what you want to set as those requirements. You could technically have, I guess, no requirements for the amount of time that's required to log, and just make sure that they are logging all of the evidence and things like that. But the idea is that the amount of time recorded doesn't necessarily constitute completion. It is still something that you go and manually set as completed. But there is, say, workflow integration as well, so that you can set up things to say, here's this placement where the completion date has elapsed, and prompt you to go and complete them, for example. So it is very interwoven throughout the system, whether it be templates, workflow, reports, everything like that should really be there and supported.
Yeah, so you could say that you're expecting one logbook entry a week, and the learner is going to be with the host employer for 40 weeks in that year. So therefore, you would say 40 days is the requirement when creating that placement, and that would give both you and the learner a good sense of progression in terms of their placement process or their traineeship process.
Yep, sure. I think we've gone a little bit over time already, so I think we might end up just leaving it there. So we'll try and post some of these questions and some answers to them where possible, or we can get in touch with people or share them openly if we think they're pretty widely applicable, and say add them to our FAQs help article as well. Might be a good place for us to include some of these answers. But yeah, thanks everybody for joining us, and we're really excited for people to start using it, and to get the system out there and being used. Something we've put a lot of effort into, and I think we're really excited to give the best solution that we can to all of our clients. So if you have, again, any feedback, please help us to make the feature the best it can be. We really still are trying to improve everything we can about it and support everyone that we can.
Yeah, and just again reiterating, it's not set in stone what we have at the moment. We feel we've got a really good foundation, but from here we know that this is a process that's traditionally been done pretty differently from training org to training org. So at this stage, we'd love to hear from you. What sort of parts of the process that you do at the moment feel really should be represented within the system, and we can look at how much of that same feedback is coming in and sort of prioritize our roadmap accordingly. And I think if your question wasn't gotten to as part of this, we are going to be answering all of those, and I think probably we're going to distribute the answers to those with the other material. So don't dismay if we didn't get to your question this time around. But I think that was pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's all good.
Awesome. All right.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks everyone for coming. I believe we'll be emailing out to all the participants all the things that we mentioned so far. So jump in there, give it a go, and we'll see you next time.